Before we get started on the Macros 101 lesson, first give yourself a little pat on the back because you are actually tackling the topic of macros. Even a lot of experienced reporters haven't fully utilized this feature inside of Eclipse, so consider yourself ahead of the game. First off, what is a macro? Well, the way I want to explain it is to remind you about how hyperkeys work. Now, if you recall, hyperkeys is where you can just press a key on your computer's keyboard to do any variety of editing functions. Hyperkeys only will work not in real time. I mean, as I said, it's editing. It's after the fact when you're in a transcript. Similarly, macros are a chain of actions that Eclipse is doing that it does automatically without you having to go through every single step. You just trigger Eclipse to do it by pressing a stroke on your writer. Now, for the purpose of this class, I focus almost entirely on macros, or we call them real-time macros. Again, you input something on your writer in real time, and it'll trigger some sort of feature. I've opened up the Eclipse Real-Time Kit Summary PDF, which can be found inside of the Eclipse documentation folder. The way I get to that, and I'll just back up and go here, is by pressing on the Help drop-down menu, go to Eclipse documentation. This is where it'll open up that folder, and inside of it, I clicked on the Eclipse Real-Time Kit Summary. Now, the reason I did that is because this very useful, well, as it says, real-time editing kit made by Keith Vincent of Eclipse is a really convenient breakdown of some of the more common macros. Eclipse already has, I don't know, maybe close to 100 pre-made macros that already exist inside of your system. You don't have to worry about making them. It just comes down to finding them, recognizing what they do, and then, well, giving it a stroke so that you could start using in your real time. Macros can also be created, but we're not going to cover it in this class. This is Macros 101 after all. So if you have this open, you can take some time to understand the macro name, a little sample of the steno. This is simply a suggestion what you might have on your writer to trigger such macro, and then I love this column, the purpose. Why on earth would you want to use this? For this class, I actually will focus at the very close to the end, 5 examples that I think are pretty useful for a student to start using already, or at least are simple enough to see in action. I'll get this out of the way, but now that you know where it is, you can check it out whenever you want. Let's first see, where do the macros exist inside of Eclipse? How can we access them? Go inside of your User Settings and come on over to the Edit tab. Macros is a button, and if you press it, wow, look at this list. There is a lot. Some of them are, and most of them, are pretty self-explanatory. This is going to run a Google search, for example. Now let me jump somewhere else. Oh, look at that. Or this one, I suppose. It deletes. I imagine that this is the same as simply pressing the D. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. Did it delete? I just double-click the name to bring up the macro editor, and inside of here, you'll see the name of the macro, and then these little buttons we'll get to in a bit. But this window, let me find one that has more examples. It will be a, there you go. It'll actually be a list that's in very simple code, essentially, that Eclipse is reading, and it does this batch action in order to, I don't know, at this point, do dialogue Alt-E. I'm not too familiar with what that is. That's why we're not going to focus on this one. But just so you have a sense of how it works. The way that these work, actually, no, before I get to that, let me focus on what I'm actually interested in. There we go. I see, good. Cap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now something about these names, again, in addition to the title actually saying what it does, in this case, capitalizing, 1 word, 2 previous words, 3, 4, or 5, RT next to it stands for real time. This can help you to quickly look through the list and focus on macros that you can start applying with real-time editing. So in the case of Cap 1, if you click it, again, this is just, wow, what Eclipse does, never mind. But what's important here is, inside of this window is where you can essentially activate this macros and give it a dictionary entry or a speed key in order to trigger it. In the case of real-time macros, again, we're editing right from the keyboard, so we're always going to be pressing on dictionary entry. When we do that, well, this looks familiar, doesn't it? It's the stenostrokes dialog. Mine's already filled out. I simply assigned a stroke here. Right? I mean, I prefer it to be 1 to signify 1 word, asterisk, and D. When you press OK, the global dialog window will pop up. And inside of this, well, this is the syntax for triggering this macro. Squiggly bracket, capital M colon, and then the name of it, and squiggly bracket. Mine's already in place, but I'll just go ahead with it. Now let's imagine that there's something from this list that's something you don't need to do or want to do in real time off of your writer. The other alternative you have is to use a speed key. And this is as very self-explanatory. It's a keyboard command where you can, actually I believe if you click, there you go. Okay, I pressed a keystroke and then I could say, if I press V, then it will trigger this macro. But again, we're focusing mostly on real-time macros in this case, but you have a sense of what these two things mean. Once you have assigned any macro with a dictionary entry, to trigger it, press OK, and OK your way out of it. For this next portion, well, now that you know obviously how to trigger and use your macros, let's talk about some examples that are going to be useful for you. In the case that I just covered, it's about capitalizing the last 1 to 5 words and and globally it. So in the instance of, let's say he ran into Bob, well, that's a name. I should have had it capitalized. So before I move forward, I pressed 1 asterisk Z. Boop, and it popped up perfectly. This is really great, of course, for any proper pronouns, names of buildings and people and places. If you follow what I showed you on how to activate this cap1 real-time macro, why not do it for two words or 3 words? Let's say he went to Green Street. I did it 2 asterisk Z, as you can see here in my notes, and it went back and capitalized the last 2 words. Let's do it for 3 words. He read War and Peace. Again, my trigger is 3 asterisk Z, and it went back and it capitalized not exactly all 3 words, but I'm actually glad it didn't. Eclipse is smart enough to know that it's not going to capitalize and in any situation unless it starts a sentence. But then again, you wouldn't have to tell it to capitalize it because it's already at the beginning of the sentence. Again, I just want to reiterate that the triggers we have here are my strokes, 1 asterisk Z, 2, or 3, are just things that I decided to come up with. If you're going to utilize this macro, don't feel obligated to use the same stroke. You can do anything you want. It's entirely up to you. Actually, while we're on the subject of what's happening over here on the note portion of the screen, you'll notice that anything that is a macro comes up with a white background and blue text. That's something that I believe is the default setting, but if you're curious about what it looks like or what you want to change it to, you would find that under Alt-U, Display, Color Selection, and it would be, there we go, the steno macros in the tracking window, or the note window. I'm not sure why they call it tracking. Okay, so that's a pretty useful one. What do we have next? Well, this one's pretty straightforward. I'm actually in a real-time file, and oh, look at this. The court said, stop, this is quite enough, madam. Poor reporter. May we have the last question right back? Well, golly, you can't even see where the last question was. Instead of having to scroll back, maybe even pages during a real job, I utilized the following macro. Let's take a look. Edit tab, Macros. This one is going to be called Find Last Question. How straightforward is that? I think I came across this by chance, and it seemed simple enough to me, so I decided to use it. Oh, right next is also finding the last answer. How I decided to activate it is by simply doing question bank, question bank, question bank. And it jumped me right up. Look at that. Now I could actually read back what the last question was. You understood that, didn't you? You could do the same thing with answer. Again, these are pretty useful for when colloquy gets out of hand, goes on for a long time, and then they ask for readback. It'll save you a lot of time. Another one is to stitch the previous word. That is simply called stitch previous word -RT inside the macros. Well, let's see it in action. Her name was, okay, yeah, I guess Smith, but there's so many different, yeah, okay, so she said that, but we can just stitch it rather than having to do my alphabet. I think I just do spell. There we go. Spell was my macros trigger, and it stitched the previous word. It had to be right next to it. That's pretty useful. Oh, here's a good one. This one is called check note -RT. Check. How easy is that? Okay, what it did is it it jumped above the paragraph I was in and input this funny little green text, green background of text, and that is a comment line signified by the CO. This is a print command text, meaning that it does not show up when you print it. It does not show up when you are outputting real time to other screens. It's simply for your convenience. And all it did is automatically made a comment line, automatically put in the word check. So I knew, I guess I had to check this, and then moved along. Now, actually, I'm going to digress a little bit and bring up something that is related to this and it is incredibly useful. You're probably thinking, why would I have to have a comment line? Why would anyone use these? Well, if you're using them for yourself, again in real time, her name was Smith, that comes up, but you're not really sure if it's the traditional spelling of Smith, if it has a Y, if it ends with an E. So as you're real timing along and you press check, check, then it'll kind of put this little line here and it brings it to your attention. So let's say you get to a break or even at the end of the deposition or session, and you need to check back on everything that you had this little comment to make sure that you didn't miss anything. Someone else, or in another situation, someone else may have put it in, such as your scopist, when you're doing real-time connection, what's it called? Editing station with someone via Connection Magic. And while I'm on this subject, I'm going to show you how you can bring up a quick breakdown of all of these comment lines. So you can jump around the transcript quickly and hone in on what you need to bring attention to. How you'll do that is by pressing on Tools, and come on down to Job Variables. Oh shoot, is that the right one? No, Job Report, the one right above it. Okay, here we go. It's generating the stats and the list of commands. Oh, how perfect is this? This has a list of, it shows the page number as well as the line number where this comment, the exhibit, was marked into evidence here. This is assuming that, I just played around obviously and put it in here, assuming that maybe the scopist had some sort of comment. Which is what's really wonderful is that when you double click on it and it jumps right to that place in the transcript, without closing this, you can go in here, note this, and make whatever changes are necessary. Maybe you caught one of the parties and ask, double check about that. Double click this one. I don't know, I just decided to do an example. Oh, here's a nice example. I double clicked on this. Maybe your scopist asks, is this the correct name for Ms. Patterson? Well, because you have it up here and you can quickly generate this list to refer to, you can then take the time to ask the witness for an answer. Comment line, comment check, whatever. It's just, I thought it would make sense to talk about the job report a little bit in this context, seeing as we're talking about comment lines. The last of the convenient macros that I thought we could get into the habit of using is to prompt Eclipse to give you a brief, maybe a one-stroke brief for a name that keeps coming up. I'm going to do this one. Okay, let's see, Betty Smith. I think you have to do it. Okay, let's just do that one time, right? Betty Smith came up once. But even that one time, or the first time it came up, I'm real timing along, and I'm realizing this is going to be coming up quite a bit. What I can do is use the brief one-word -RT macro. I'm sorry, it's actually going to be brief two-word, meaning please look at those two previous words and give me a brief for that. My trigger is two asterisk and a B. This should be. Oh my gosh, is it not working? No, it did work. You're right. I don't know. I was expecting to see something over here. But what's important is that, wow, look at this green text right here. Brett with an asterisk equals Betty Smith. And if Brett, I suppose it is. If I do that, there we go. Wow, one stroke. Why are my notes? There they go. Okay, the notes were frozen. That's why I couldn't see before. Okay, yes. Now if I input this in, I'm utilizing that auto brief suggestion that Eclipse came up with. I'm going to end here, but that's a nice little teaser for what we're going to be discussing in the next class, which is utilizing the auto brief feature of Eclipse. So I hope that you learned a thing or two about macros. They're really not that hard. They're all built in there for you. It's just a matter, again, of finding them, thinking about which ones you want to use and why, and then just assigning a stroke from your writer to them. It's that easy. So I hope that the next time I see you, you're actually utilizing some macros yourself. Thanks again for watching, and happy eclipsing.